You've probably never questioned who you are. You assume the answer is obvious: your body, your thoughts, your memories, your personality. But what if this assumption is wrong? What if the person you think you are is actually a mental construct? In psychology, the sense of self is understood as a mental model created by the mind. This video explores what happens when that model is examined closely, not to destroy it, but to understand it. Because understanding how the self is constructed can completely change how we relate to our thoughts, emotions, and experiences. Most of the time, we experience ourselves as separate from the world. There is me inside this body, and there's everything else outside. This separation feels obvious, but psychology shows that it is largely conceptual. The brain organizes experience by drawing boundaries. Non-separation doesn't mean differences disappear. It means the differences we experience may not be as absolute as they feel. Thoughts, sensations, emotions, and perceptions appear distinct, but they arise within a single field of awareness. Just as waves look separate while being made of the same water, experiences can feel personal while arising from the same underlying process. At the center of this process is awareness itself. Awareness is not a thought, not an emotion, and not a personality trait. It is the capacity to experience. You don't see awareness the way you see objects. You notice everything through it. From a psychological perspective, awareness is the background condition that allows perception, thinking, and feeling to occur. To make sense of experience, the mind operates at different levels. At the practical level, the world functions through cause and effect. Actions have consequences, choices matter, responsibilities exist. Psychology fully accepts this level, but beneath it is a deeper level where experience itself is examined, and at that level, the sense of a fixed, separate self begins to soften. Much of human distress comes not from experience itself, but from interpretation. The mind labels, categorizes, and builds stories around what happens. These interpretations feel real, but they are not always accurate. When the mind mistakes its interpretations for reality itself, confusion begins. The same thing happens with identity. Most people identify themselves with their body, their thoughts, or their emotional patterns. But all of these can be observed. Thoughts arise and disappear. Emotions shift. The body changes over time. Whatever can be observed cannot be the observer. This leads to a crucial psychological insight. The self we usually identify with is something we experience, not something we are. What remains when thoughts are observed rather than believed is awareness itself, the simple knowing that experience is happening. This awareness is not personal in the way we assume. It doesn't have opinions, fears, or a past. It is the same capacity for experiencing that is present whenever perception occurs. This doesn't mean individuality disappears. Individuality functions at the practical level. Personalities exist, differences exist, choices matter. But psychologically, the suffering comes from taking this functional identity to be absolute. When the mind believes it must constantly protect, defend, and improve this constructed self, anxiety becomes inevitable. From this perspective, suffering is not caused by life itself, but by misidentification. We identify with temporary experiences, success, failure, roles, images, and narratives. Because these things change, the sense of security collapses again and again. The problem isn't emotion or desire. The problem is confusing what changes with what observes change. This understanding does not remove responsibility or ethics. Actions still matter. Behavior still has consequences. But when the sense of rigid separation loosens, motivation shifts. Compassion becomes less forced and more natural. Reactions soften. Psychological flexibility increases. Freedom, in this context, is not a dramatic transformation or a permanent emotional state. It is clarity. Like realizing you were watching a movie, the experience continues. But confusion about what it is begins to dissolve. Practices such as reflection, observation, or mindful inquiry exist not to create something new, but to reduce identification. They help the mind see its own processes more clearly. The goal is not to escape life, but to engage with it without being trapped by mental stories. In a world that constantly pressures us to define, defend, and perfect who we are, this perspective offers something different. You are not a problem that needs fixing. You are not a story that must be constantly maintained. Beneath thought, beneath labels, beneath identity, there is simply awareness, already present. The final insight is simple but unsettling. Much of what we suffer over comes from confusing a mental model with reality. When that confusion lessens, life doesn't disappear, but fear does. And that's when it becomes clear. You are not who you think you are. If this made you pause or see something differently, you can support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. More reflections like this are coming.